Carme. I'm one of the Associate Directors of Student Diversity and Development in our Center for Student Diversity. So I welcome you all to our Comply Now, Complain Later, Rights, Responsibilities, and Realities panel discussion. So I will introduce Trevina Bird, who is our General Counsel in the Office of General Counsel. Yes. To introduce the rest of our panel.
Thank you so much, Anya. I really appreciate being a part of this, and I want to thank you all for attending. I love how, if this is the same thing I saw earlier, which is complain now, complain later. It's actually a question, right, with the question mark at the back of it. So I think that's really a real kind of discussion-provoking way to frame that, and I love that. So again, I'm Trevina. I'm the General Counsel here. Been here since this past April, so going on a year, and have had a wonderful opportunity to interact with a lot of the staff on campus in discussion of these really important topics. And so the idea behind this panel today is to figure out how we can be a better resource to you to provide some education around this issue and to get some feedback from students about what their questions and concerns might be, and make it just really as interactive as possible. So I think that we're going to have a good discussion, and one of the things that Ani asked me to do was to give a bit of an overview real quickly as to why this is an important discussion. And we all come at this topic with a range of different backgrounds and perspectives, and all those need to be respected and valued. Mine is very interesting and unique because I grew up in a very, very poor part of Denver, Colorado, and where the police presence was not a welcome one. It was one that was always viewed as synonymous with, something bad is about to go down, somebody's in trouble, they're not our friends. And so that's the culture that I was raised in. And then when I went on to law school, that really framed the work that I did. I was more defense oriented. I was active in civil rights law and litigation. And then I met and fell in love with a policeman. So that was really weird. And then when we had children, we ended up having 2 sons. And so what was really amazing about that experience was it exposed me to the other side of it. That there are some really amazing people who do this work, that they commit so much to their communities and their families, and they put themselves at risk every day to do what they do. That doesn't mean that everyone's perfect, that doesn't mean there aren't some bad ones out there, but there are a lot of good ones too, and I gained a fuller appreciation for this as a profession. And our sons, whether they like it or not, had perspectives from a lawyer and a cop, so law and order. I think some of you heard me say that joke before. Our kids had to understand what that meant about comply now and complain later, because as a law enforcement officer, there's a certain culture within which that you work, and that's what we learned from our family connections. That there's it's helpful to be informed about how they need to do their job and the things that we might take for granted. Something that people are trained to do who do this line of work. So my sons learned that growing up, and so they had a kind of an edge when it came to how to deal with law enforcement if they were ever stopped. And on the flip side, as an attorney, I was able to say, and my husband would say the same thing, you don't have to talk to people. You don't have to, there's certain things you need to know in terms of your rights, but there's also certain things you need to know in terms of being cooperative and respectful. And those 2 things will win the day at the end, because then if your rights are violated, later on down the road, you're in much stronger footing to be able to state your claim and assert your rights and demand that those issues get remedied. So that's my quick little spiel. I'm not going to talk nearly so much because these fine individuals on this panel with me are the ones who are going to do most of the talking. And so I want to introduce them to you. To my immediate left, on your right, is Officer Jay Landsman. He's the precinct commander for Baltimore County's Towson precinct. So he's right around this area, so you may have seen him before. We also have, next to Jay, we have our Towson University Assistant Vice President for Public Safety. He's our police chief, Mr. Bernard Gerst. And then we also have down at the end there, Ms. Regina Curran, and she's the director of the Student Conduct and Civility Education Office. And so these are 3 experts who I think will provide you with a lot of information. And so I think what I'll do is get the panelists warmed up for each of them to kind of talk for a minute or so about their particular backgrounds and how how their work interfaces with the campus community and in different kinds of ways, their philosophy around that and dealing with students, and kind of however you want to introduce yourself. And then we're going to open it up to questions. So start thinking about what you'd like to ask, and then just raise your hand and I'll call on you. Okay? So, Jay?
Okay, my name's Jay Landsman. Again, I'm the commander of the Towson precinct. I am part of a 4-generation police family. Probably, I think 13 of us altogether, starting with my grandfather in 1936, and then my uncle uncles, my dad, my two of my cousins, my sister, two brothers, and two of my nieces. So this is kind of what we talk about. It, you know, Sunday dinners we're pretty much all together. My kids kind of joke about that. That's kind of they think Tom Selleck looks like my dad, so they joke that it's like Blue Bloods. But anyway, I mean, but that's we grew up around that. But you know, we were also we had attorney friends and people from the the criminal justice system because you're interacting with those folks all along but we just came growing up with the understanding that it was something that you had to do. As a police officer, you're going out when the weather's not so great, when you're doing things that other people don't want to do, and it's not always the stuff that's portrayed on TV, the glamorous stuff. I mean, there's a lot of times where you're standing knee deep in water and you're making sure traffic doesn't go through an area because it's a sinkhole or something like that, or you're going in to check on somebody in a house who hasn't been heard from for weeks, and you may or may not be okay in there, and these are just things that there's no number in the phone book other than 911, and that somebody's got to do it, and you show up there and you can't just decide, well this wasn't it, this call's really not for me, I'm going to go home. You're kind of that last call, somebody else, if it's not assigned to somebody else, it's the police. So it is a big sense of duty and a sense that look, we never closed. A snowstorm, we had to make sure we had the four-wheel drives, we had the all-wheel drives, we had people up in hotels, we had people sleeping in my office, in the conference room, because, although businesses and things like that close, we can't just not get around in the snow. We had to make sure that we were able to respond to calls. Could have been a dialysis patient that needs to get from point A to point B, but emergency services need to be delivered, and you got to do it. So, I mean, that's the culture that I grew up with. And Chief Joe.
I'm Bernie Gerst. I have been, the 13th of this month was my 38th year anniversary of being in law enforcement. I was in the Baltimore County Police Department for 22 and a half years. I went from the bottom at the rank of corporal or cadet to the rank of colonel, which is the second under the chief in the department. I retired 15 years ago, January 3rd. I took the job here at Towson, so I just celebrated another anniversary here at Towson. I've been in just about every assignment you can imagine, from patrol, street cop, to narcotics detective, to community relations, to you name it. There was a time when my entire immediate family was here on this campus in the form of working as staff. Both my son and daughter went to school here. My son is 28 years old. He's currently a prosecutor in Calvert County, and my daughter is 25, and she's now a vet tech. So there was a time when every decision that I made about this campus affected not only you all, but it affected my whole entire immediate family. So I definitely had a vested interest in this place. And I know we'll get into some question and answer things, but I'm very happy to be here. I think we need more of these kinds of discussions. I too am an alum from Towson. I sat in some of the same buildings and some of the same classrooms you all have been in. And believe it or not, there are faculty members here who taught me, because I started out right out of high school, came here full-time for 2 years, and was working like a full-time job and a couple more part-time jobs to pay my tuition, and thought, this is crazy. So I went to the police department and figured that's a lot easier. And then came back as a part-time student and finished up in '94. And then luckily the county police department also facilitated getting my master's at Johns Hopkins. So I've kind of been around the bend a couple of times and kind of sat where you all are sitting now. So I think I have a good appreciation from the perspective of student, parent, police officer, and somebody who genuinely cares.
My name is Regina Curran. I'm the Director of Student Conduct and Civility Education here. I've been at Towson 8 months, started in July, but this is the 5th university that I worked at. So I've worked in student conduct at private schools, public schools, in New England and in sort of the mid-Atlantic area. So I've kind of experienced the student conduct, you know, the type of work that we do in a variety of different places. This topic is really interesting to me, kind of from an educational perspective, right? We tend to see folks after the fact, right? Something's happened, you've interacted with someone, right? Maybe it's a staff member here at the university, whether that's an RA, an RLC, a professor even, you know, sort of depends on who those folks are, might be TUPD, or we also deal with off-campus cases, so we do meet with students who have interacted with Baltimore County, Baltimore City, you know, and other police departments and police forces. So then, you know, I have this, the ability to kind of sit down during the daylight hours with someone when we're removed from a situation, and can sort of talk about it. You know, what happened in the moment, what were some of the factors that were kind of playing into your decision making, you know, when you were making a decision maybe to be less than compliant, right? And then what's going on now that you've had time to process it, now that you're kind of separate from that, are there kind of steps that you need to take forward from there? So I really get to process with folks and kind of end up having a lot of these conversations, right? What did you do? What could you have done? Did you do everything you could have done? You know, those sorts of things, and trying to kind of figure that out with our students after the fact. And obviously I wasn't there, so I rely a lot on, you know, just those conversations and those interactions to sort of hear, you know, from that firsthand perspective, okay, what did happen? How can we kind of analyze the situation later? So for me, it's a really interesting topic. I see our students struggling with this balance a lot here and at other institutions that I've worked at. And so, you know, I'm excited to get to have the conversation actually prior to someone being called to my office. So always looking forward to opportunities to talk about it outside of that office too.
Great. Thank you. Now I'm going to stand to make sure I don't miss any hands that might be up in the back. And just for clarification, I should have said this earlier. Most people don't know what general counsel means, I realize. I was like, what are you? They smile and nod, like, oh, you're the general counsel, that's great. I'm the chief legal officer for the campus, so that means I'm Towson's attorney. Okay, that's just so we're clear. But that doesn't mean that I can be your personal lawyer. That's another whole conversation. We can save that for after this discussion another time. So, does anyone have a question they'd like to ask? Go ahead and raise your hand. You've got a question.
Can I ask one thing about
Sure.
What do you think, how do you think we got this title of comply now, complain later? What do you think it means?
We had a question for them.
Yeah.
Yes, go ahead.
I think it means that if you're in trouble or like you're being talked about the police, you should show like a certain amount of respect with it and just like get the situation over with, and then once they're gone, then you can just be like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that happened, and then just get it all out after the fact so you don't cause more trouble for yourself.
That's a great answer.
It doesn't mean that we're asking anybody to give up their individual rights. We're not asking anybody to give up their constitutional rights. But there's always a time and a place to dispute it. And if an officer says, can I search your car, we're not saying you automatically have to say yes. But if an officer says, I'm going to search your car, it doesn't do any good to physically get into a confrontation with the officer. You can, if you've all seen court cases on TV. And what does an attorney do? They make an objection on the record. If an officer says, I'm searching your car right now, well, I object to that. I just want you to know you don't have my consent to do that. If they proceed to do it anyway, they're going to do it. It doesn't make any sense to get into a physical confrontation, but you've made the objection on the record, and there's many avenues in place to complain later. Any good, decent, professional police department will take complaints. They will take complaints anonymously, by telephone, by letter, in person. And they have processes to investigate those complaints. And they have internal affairs sections to investigate those complaints. That's internal to the police department. You also have rights as a citizen to pursue civil action against the police department, the officer, the local government. There's a lot of avenues to address grievances. You know, I was thinking about this morning. You know, I don't want to necessarily have to pay for an attorney to represent me because I've been charged now with resisting arrest or assaulting an officer or injuring an officer in the performance of their duties. I'd rather spend my money later if I need to hire an attorney to file suit. So that's the gist of it, is that we want everybody to, at the end of the day, to go home safely, and there are good avenues to address your concerns and your recourse later.
Thank you. I really appreciate you sharing that, Chief. And what I'd like to do is break that down a little bit. So we're going to talk about the first part where you know cerebrally in your head you should comply now for all the things that were just mentioned by the Chief. But what are some of the barriers to that? What are some of the challenges to that in the moment? Yes, in the back?
You might think that the communication or whatever the incident is happening is unfair, so you want to respond and question that it's unfair.
What else? Yes,
I guess like a human instinct for defense and survival, like there's something that activates whenever you feel threatened of, I need to defend my own.
Okay, and those could be two different things. So what you just mentioned had to do with, this is not justice, like I'm being unfairly accused or something, whereas you're saying, I feel I might be physically in danger, like there may be an issue with regard to how this officer is treating me, where I might be harmed, maybe as well, taking that a step further. What else? I want these guys to respond to that.
You're probably not thinking very clearly, like a million things are probably going through your head. So you probably just do the first thing that you think of without thinking about the consequences, and then 5 minutes later you'll be like, well, that was really stupid.
Yeah, so the heat of the moment, the frustration. What other things make us not think clearly? Yes? Yeah, maybe. Sometimes we might have some of those influences as well, which I'm sure they can speak to complicates matters quite a bit. What else before I turn it over to the panel? Other conflicts or barriers to compliance? Yes.
I mean, it like differs with all situations, if there's a speeding ticket or like a domestic violence or anything, but I think they have what's best interest for the safety of all, not just themselves or the other people. So sometimes making that the priority as a safety, like the people might not think it's what's best for them, but they're doing like what's right in their mind at the time. So some people might have a hard time like complying with that when they don't think it's right for themselves.
Okay, yeah, that does. Well, sir,
Well,
what do you think in response to
Well,
those?
I mean, I can tell you, I mean, from somebody who was pulled over, for speeding when I was, and given a ticket when I was a young cadet, and matter of fact, one night in Garrison, over Uncle Winans Road, I was coming out of my wife's house. We were going to the movies, and one of my fellow captains now, who was a burglary detective at the time, pulled up, and as I was walking in my car, he stopped and said, "Hey, where are you guys going?" And so we're going out. Do you have any ID on you? And I didn't know at the time when he stopped me, and I didn't recognize him, but as somebody that I knew, I was a cadet in the city at the time, and he said there's a rash of burglaries, and I didn't know that, and not living in my wife's neighborhood there, but there was a rash of break-ins in the area, and he didn't see us come out of the house. He saw us as we were approaching my car. I don't know what the description of the car or the suspect was, but it was late. We were probably going to a later movie, and he stopped because he saw people moving around in the neighborhood. And these were around the times when these burglaries were happening. And he asked me for my ID. I said, "Yes, sir, I do. I have it." Gave it to him, and he ran it. And then he came back and he realized, well, at that time, my cousin and several others were working at that station. He said, "I should arrest you for this," but he stopped, and to this day, I said, "Remember that time you jacked me up in front of my wife's house?" But he said, "Yeah, we were on a burglary detail, and you were the only thing moving around in the neighborhood." But I calmly gave him my license and everything. I didn't even think of saying, "Hey, I'm a police cadet." I mean, at that moment, he was kind of controlling that scenario, and the more we talked in a calm, rational way, and the more information he got, the more the situation then kind of de-escalated to, okay, well, you're obviously not the folks we're looking for, and we moved on.
I think that's really helpful perspective to share. But I want to ask another question. I've asked the rest of the panel to speak to this. How do you respond to questions from the audience who say, well, that happened to you once a long time ago, and it happens to us far more regularly because we're young, we're students, we're targeted more. We're racially profiled because we're black or because we're Muslim or whatever. There's reasons why some people feel like they get more of that attention that you just described. So in some ways you can relate because you have that experience, but in some ways it's different because it may take a different tone. So how would you respond to that?
I mean, I would respond by saying the descriptions of suspects that are provided to the officers are given out over the radio. We have no control over who the suspects are. I mean, I can tell you right now, I spent several minutes cleaning my shoes before I came over here because I was chasing a burglary suspect over here off of Brook Road, off of Burke Avenue, just minutes before. That suspect was a black male. To me, it made no difference whether that suspect was white or black. You know, the dispatcher relayed the information. And, you know, when I went to the front of the house, the subject was at the back window, kneeling down with an axe ready to bust the window, and he ran. It wasn't any more exciting because it was a black male. If it was a red-haired white guy, I wanted to catch the burglar. But the descriptions and the people that we go after in terms of suspects are very much determined by the victims who report the crimes, the witnesses who see what's going on, and we react to that. And when we stop somebody and we say, look, you know, we're stopping because we just got a robbery or a burglary, and the description was this, and I know, you know, a lot of kids are like, well, I fit the description. Well, if they put the description out, you know, of somebody, whether it's a white male or black male wearing X, Y, and Z, a lot of times people throw their shirt or their jacket, and they're walking from that area, and we're down to maybe shoes or hair or something else, but a lot of times it could be a black male. And it would be easier for us if the description is something else. You know, I mean, I think if we could wave a wand and say, you know what, hopefully all this crime is being committed by, you know, blonde-haired white guys. I mean, because I think it would be less less controversial for us to stop somebody and say, hey, you know, what are you doing coming from here? And you know, we have to say, hey, you fit the description of the burglary suspect. But there's a lot more variables that go into that. If you're not the suspect, that conversation is going to go very quickly. When I ask you, hey, where were you coming from? Well, I'm coming from my girlfriend's house. She lives right there. I'm going to class over here. The suspect's leaving that area. Those kind of questions are going to start probably not making sense. You know, I was coming from my cousin's house. Well, where does he live? He lives, you know, 2 blocks south of here, but I'm coming from the north. You know, where or we're going to talk to the guy who's got, you know, 2 pizzas in his hand and, you know, has got the Domino's shirt on. Well, we know that guy's working. He's probably on his way home. That conversation is going to be very quickly. He may not even be stopped at all. But we have to weed through some of that to get to the bad guys, because when they leave the scene, they want to blend in to the crowd around them. So sometimes we do end up stopping people that aren't the suspect, and those conversations are awkward. And I know it's tough to be stopped and to go through those questions, but I can tell you, and I also hear the whole time he was talking to me, he had his hand on his gun. Well, we got officers. I sent 2 carloads up to Harford County today. And that conversation started with that guy, how was your day? And it went like that. And that guy shot that deputy in the head. And, you know, that when we go in, and when we all sat around the station going, man, we totally could have seen getting that wanted subject call at the Panera. And what do? You're in a crowded restaurant. You know, this guy's got a warrant. So you go in there, hey, how you doing? You know, can I talk to you for a second? Can we step outside? You would never think that this guy's going to pull a gun in a crowded restaurant, but it happens. And that's why I think, you know, some of these interactions, they seem tense. Or the officer he was bladed and he seemed like he was going to jump on me, or he had his hand on his gun. Actions are faster than reactions, and the information that informs the way these guys carry themselves out on the street has them on edge all the time.
Bernie, what do you have to add to that?
Well, to kind of compliment what Jay's saying, and it is true. I mean, you're sitting there thinking, well, why can't this officer see that I'm a good person? Why can't they understand that I'm a good guy, I'm a good lady, you know? It's the same way the police are feeling the same way. Why can't they see that I'm just trying to do my job? You know, I'm not here to hassle them. I'm not here stopping them because of what they're wearing. I'm here because I'm doing my job. I got a call for a burglary, and this is the description I have, and this person's in close proximity to the scene, and they're wearing clothing similar to that or shoes. But there's more to it than that. Typically, they're also looking for things like, it's a cold day today, are they sweating because they were just running? Are they out of breath? You know, there's a lot of other things that go into it. But, you know, again, thinking about this morning coming here, a lot of it, you know, the old saying, perception is reality. And if your perception is that the police are inherently bad, the police are inherently racist, the police are inherently anti-fill in the blank, and if you happen to fall in that category, and now a police officer is coming approaching you, you're naturally going to think, he's hassling me. And that's something we need to get beyond. You know, that's something, but let's face it, you know, Jay grew up in a family where the dinner time conversation was about what Uncle Louie was doing on the Baltimore City Police Department. If you grew up in a household where the conversation was about the bad police and the police did this and the police that, and the police, I don't care who you are, you're naturally going to have that suspicion when you're talking about the police. And how do we break that down? You know, how do we interact with one another? Well, this is a good start. Project Unity that we had here. If you have anybody here for Project Unity, okay, seeing a dummy like me out there trying to line dance, and seeing Jay out there, seeing, wait a minute, they're
See me out there watching him trying to line
yeah. You know, they're human beings. You know, get beyond the clothing that we're wearing. They're human beings, and like any other human being, they have, you know, they have their weaknesses, they have their imperfections. And a human being makes mistakes. Nobody's perfect. Everybody will make mistakes at some point in time. And like any profession, regardless of what it is, you're going to have some people who are really, really good at their job and some people who aren't so good at their job. And that's where you need to address the people who aren't so good through training, education, discipline, progressive discipline, whatever it takes. I'll give you a good example. If this weekend, if a Towson University student got arrested and charged with, pick a crime, theft, what do you think the media would start off with? It wouldn't be John Jones got arrested with theft. It would be Towson University student. All of a sudden, you've lost your individual identity now. It's a Towson University student. The same thing happens with police. If I do something wrong, it won't be Mr. Bernie Gerst. It'll be Police Chief Bernie Gerst did this. Well, if a Towson University student gets charged with theft this weekend, does that mean that every Towson University student are thieves? No. And you can't make that same broad extension to every person who wears a police uniform. If you see media accounts of a police officer who did something wrong, it doesn't mean that every cop in the United States is bad, racist, prejudiced, whatever term you want to use. You need to get to know them, you need to get to know the profession. There's something that's available in the Baltimore County Police Department, and it's been available in this department for the 15 years that I've been here. Any one of you who wants to can come out and ride with one of my officers for a shift and see and experience what we do every day. And you'll hear the call come out for the theft that just occurred in the bookstore and the description that we're given by the person. We're lucky here at TU because we have over 1,200 surveillance cameras. So typically what will happen is when that call comes out and we have a description, we can get a still photograph of the person as they're leaving the building. So now if we do stop somebody, we can take the picture and say, no, that's not him. See ya, thank you very much. But it goes into a lot of things, and we can take days and days to talk about this. It's how you interact with the person. Do you treat that person with respect? Do you say to the person, look, I'm sorry I had to stop you because of this, you match the description, and when I realize that you're not the person, how do I de-escalate and how do I disengage from you now? Do I thank you very much and wish you a nice day? And do I say, hey, if you see somebody who matches the description, please call us? Because everybody wants to feel like we're okay. And it comes down to just basic respect. But like what Jay was talking about, if you are stopped by a police officer, all that police officer is trying to do is to eliminate you as a potential suspect. Well, you serve yourself well by being cooperative and telling the officer instead of getting very, very quiet and refusing to answer their questions, because now what have you just done? You've just now heightened their suspicion. Instead of alleviating it, you've heightened it. Are you absolutely required, that you got to sit there and tell them where you went and what you had for lunch that day? No, but you know what? If you do, the encounter is probably going to end quick, move faster if you're cooperative, and you can be on your way, and that officer can go and try to find the right person who committed the crime. Does that make sense? But the best way we can do this is by communicating with each other and understanding each other.
Yeah, I appreciate that you said that. We might revisit that point you made about the respectful interaction, because my guess is that there are some people in the audience who are saying, yeah, that's all good if I'm approached in a respectful way. And I'm sure that you will both nod your heads and say in your many years of experience, you don't always have officers who are on that level with regard to what your goals are for training, that they're going to be consistently engaging with citizens on that level and, not creating that escalation. But I want to talk to Regina now, and I want to ask from your perspective in the chair that you sit in, talking about those interactions. Again, we're going to talk about what to do afterwards with the complaint process. But in that moment, what do you see are the mistakes that students tend to make? That when you talk about them after the fact, they look back on and say, oh, if I had done X, Y, Z differently.
So as we've been having this whole conversation, you can see me looking at papers. The reason is I actually pulled some statistics. So, we have a specific charge in the Code of Student Conduct. It's 11A. That's our uncooperative behavior or failure to comply with the proper instructions of officials acting in performance of their duties. So that's the charge we would assign if we suspect that maybe someone was less than compliant during an interaction. And I was sort of looking at that as the conversations were going on to see, okay, well, when we charged that one, what else was going on? And as I looked through this, the most common violation that's also charged with that one is, can anyone guess? Alcohol. More often than not, right, it's that charge and then it's alcohol. And I think, whether it's sort of personally or anecdotally or things you've seen on TV, we can all probably understand that alcohol definitely can make people act in different ways than they might if they were sober, right? So I think a lot of times we're having those conversations, and I'm not going to say to students, I would be, not good at my job if I expected none of our students on campus to ever consume alcohol. Okay, I would just be constantly shocked.
But if you decided to do that, that would be great.
yeah, if you did, put me out of business, that's totally fine. But I think that there's a level of understanding, basically yourself, right? Like the only thing we control, and I was taught this at a very young age, the only thing we can control is ourselves. And so I can control basically the amount of impairment that I have. I can control, my own actions. I think a lot, as we have this conversation, there's a lot of people on all sides of this issue who think body cameras are the answer, right? Body cameras will solve this. We'll be able to see things on camera. Quite honestly, seeing things on camera brings a whole new light to things, right? And there's still several perspectives to a story. You could tell a different story. When you can't hear audio and you're just seeing a black and white image, you could tell 10 different stories about that, number one. But number two, I think a lot of times in our own minds, we're being very cooperative. We're being very compliant. But we're not always the best assessors of those scenarios, especially when all the things you all pointed out, right? Maybe we're impaired by alcohol. Maybe we're in a fight or flight, type of mental state. Maybe we feel like something unjust or unfair is going on. When those things are happening to us, we're probably not the best assessors, of our own compliance, of our own sort of self-control. So I think a lot of times, when I'm talking about with students about this is, what were the circumstances that were going on? Let's see if we can identify, other things that were going on around you that might have triggered or escalated this particular scenario, and then talk about how we can think about those in the future. But the other thing is kind of planning for it, right? I would say there are certain communities, you sort of talk about, people feeling targeted or something like that. There are communities where people expect to be stopped by the police. I would say, I interact with our black men on campus, and they say, I expect to be stopped by the police. At some point, I'm gonna have that interaction. And in many ways, they plan for that, right? And I've talked to those students who, I hear the ways that they respond, and they can be very compliant. They're like, well, I expected this. I planned ahead. I knew, how I was gonna react when this scenario happened, because I expected it to happen to me. But then there's other students who say, I never expected to have an interaction, at 2 a.m. with a police officer. I was just trying to walk home. Maybe I was just trying to walk home from the bars while I had consumed alcohol underage or whatever. But I was just trying to walk home. I never expected it. And so it's sort of that, sometimes it's that unexpected. I never planned for, I never expected, so I just reacted, right? I just did gut whatever was happening in that moment. So it can be, unfortunately, I'm meeting people when it's already happened, right? But there can be that planning piece, that thinking about, if this were going to happen to me, what would I do, right? If I had this type of interaction, how would I respond? And you can make that a blanket statement, right? I mean, I sort of think about, I'm from the South, okay, so that colors the way I was raised, right? We're sort of you get more flies with honey type of thing. Mm-hmm. So my expectation is, I interact with authority, yes ma'am, no ma'am, yes sir, no sir. That's how I respond. But that's how I respond in all of those sorts of circumstances, right? So I think, you don't even necessarily have to think about, okay, if I were to interact with a police officer, but if I were to interact with any authority, and we all interact with authority. I mean, I know I'm the director of student conduct, so in some ways, like, I have an authority position, but there are authorities in my life, that I interact with on a daily basis. And so I have to think about how I interact with them too. So you don't just have to sort of plan for, okay, police, but sort of in general, like, if I'm in this scenario, what do I do? Planning ahead, thinking it through, doing different scenarios, and then being responsible for putting yourself in situations, where you do or don't have control.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. Now, I'm going to ask another question, but I just want to pause first to see if anyone has a burning question from the audience. Want to raise your hand if you have one? Yes, sir.
Sort of drawing on what you said, with planning for events, what are some of the good resources available to a student or any citizen, really, to sort of know, to be able to tell when their rights have been infringed? I'm always in favor of comply first and sort it out later, because that prevents the situation from potentially escalating. But afterwards, what are good resources for them to go to be able to tell if the police officer or anybody in authority actually did something wrong? Because I think a lot of times we might see a police officer, one of their actions as wrong, when really they're just doing their job and your rights haven't been violated.
You could call the supervisor directly, or you could call up to our internal affairs section, the 410-887-2300, and you can report something in the internal affairs section. They may review it there and send it back down to me at the precinct level, to where I'll go and pull up the call. And it's important. I mean, if you have an interaction with the police and you feel like you've been treated unfairly, like we've been saying, yes sir, no sir, yes ma'am, no ma'am, comply. And if everything's done and you're like, you know what, this was kind of messed up, you call and make your complaint. And when it comes down to me, I'm digging through, and you make note of the date, the time, where you were exactly, and all those things are going to be I'm going to be able to go back and pinpoint who was working, who was in that car, who responded to that call, and find out exactly what happened. Maybe it was something that was captured on a camera somewhere. I mean, pretty soon it'll be the body cameras. And in that case, if it's a squared away officer, and I read everything, and then I talk to you, and like look, here's why he stopped you, and this is what they're saying, this is what you're saying. If we're way off base, then it may be something where I kick it back to internal affairs and say, look, there's something more to this. I can't resolve this here. Or if we're pretty close, where you're just like, the guy seemed a little short with me, but I didn't know that he was just coming from the robbery in progress call, which could color some of those interactions where you're like, what, this guy was kind of a jerk. He was kind of short with me and stuff. But an 8-hour shift is a roller coaster, and we do what we can to try and keep these officers, find that homeostasis, that find that balance throughout the shift. But you're going from, robbery in progress to, my lawnmower's missing and I haven't seen it in 3 weeks. I was away on vacation, or something completely a non-criminal act, that has no threat at all, and then boom, you're back up here for a suicidal that you're trying to talk out of a room.
So do you have something on your website where people can link to?
Yeah, the county website has all the phone numbers, but 887.
And it's phone numbers, and there's not like a submission form or something like that you're aware of?
No, I mean, we have the iWatch, but that's more for stuff you see.
So Chief Gerst, can you talk about that from Towson's perspective?
Absolutely. Being here at Towson, I mean, you all have the luxury that you can go into the directory and you can find our personal email addresses. My email address is out there. I'm in the directory. It's on our webpage. We have an online complaint form. We have, like I said, telephonic. In today's day and age of social media, if you put something on TU's Facebook page, by God, in 30 minutes or less, Ray Feldman in media relations would probably be calling my phone to say somebody's complaining on Facebook about a TU cop. They're very responsive, And I go back to the same point, a good professional accredited police department, a professionally run police department that has a positive organizational culture does not avoid complaints. They're not going to try to shrug complaints off. They're interested in complaints because, like any business, we're in a business. We're an agency that provides customer service. And you think we're not interested in whether or not we're going positive customer service or not? We're required under our accreditation to do citizen attitude surveys. We want to know if people are satisfied with the services that we're providing. If we have somebody, a representative of our organization, who is out there not representing our organization well, we want to know about that. And again, it's not always that we're going to chop their head off. It might be that they need training or retraining, or they might need to have their boss sit down with them and do informal counseling with them. It's like any other organization, whether you're in a hospital or whether you're in a faculty member. If you're not doing your job well, we need to know about it so we can try to correct that. Yes, sir.
I appreciate all of your remarks. I have a question more specifically for you, Mr. Chief, or Ms. Regina. Being that you interact with Towson students on a consistent basis, how do you draw the line between, yes, this could be my child, or like, yes, you broke the law and I'm doing my job? Is there even a line? Like, how do you kind of make that distinction?
So, I mean, I'll just say, we have a standard, right? So, we base our decisions on what we call preponderance of the evidence, which is more likely than not. And, so that's kind of our guiding, right? And I say that because, I don't have any interaction with a student where I say, what does my gut say? I'm never going to just say, my gut says you didn't comply, that's the decision we're going to make. That's not how we make decisions. So, I think that's a big part of it. And then, when we're kind of looking at, because like, again, I said, we have this after the fact, hindsight's 2020, right? We have a lot of benefit that, obviously our colleagues in police don't have because they're sort of in there in that moment. We're going to look at all those surrounding circumstances, what seemed reasonable in the moment. What would any reasonable person, any rational person sort of have done in this moment? And there are times, like I said, I pulled some statistics, over the course of the past year, so I do a year by July 1 to now, there have been 52 individuals charged with failure to comply, 27 have been found responsible. So we're not finding them responsible for every single time. Now, I will say, some of those are still pending because they're brand new. So, there are contexts and circumstances that we're looking at. And so I would sort of ask, what would any person in this scenario do? And if what happened is something that any person in this scenario might do, then okay, we're going to give the benefit of the doubt this time. If what happened is, I really lost my cool, I really, was failing to comply, I was making a scenario difficult. This was supposed to be a stop for false ID, which typically takes, 15 minutes? and my interaction with police took 45, that's gonna start putting off some red flags for me to say, gosh, why did that take 45 minutes? They're saying there was a failure to comply, there's some circumstances going on that maybe it should have happened. So we're gonna kind of look at those circumstances, kind of talk through, and just sort of figure out, what was going on and make those decisions.
One point I want to make in terms of clarification is that what Ms. Curran is responsible for is evaluating conduct to see if it violates university policy, right?
Mhm.
The student conduct code. That's different from saying whether or not it violates a law, something that has to do with state law. Okay, so that's what the officer on this end of the table is more interested in. And so when he's looking at things and when it later would maybe be prosecuted, that standard of proof is going to change. So it goes from preponderance of the evidence, which is more likely than not, is there's 51% on the side of I think this person might be guilty, then she's going to say, okay, that you're found responsible for violating that policy. But when we're talking about something that's a criminal violation, that's going to be what? Beyond a reasonable doubt. We all watch Law and Order, so we know it's beyond a reasonable doubt. And that means, far past that. You really had to have a lot more evidence and proof to show that there's been that kind of violation. And of course, Chief Gerst is right in the middle of having to deal with both, being aware of things that are potentially policy violations for the university, as well as things that are going to be criminal violations, and having to deal with both those things, and making sure they get referred to the proper places. So just so we're clear on that sometimes you can violate one or the other or both, right? Anything to add to that?
Well, and there are times, our officers do have a certain degree of discretion. And there are times, I read every police report that's written. And there are times when police officers have students who, based on the circumstances at the time, in every case is case by case, based on the severity of whatever's being done. And sometimes they would have the legal authority to charge them criminally and don't. They'll just say, I'm referring this case to Office of Student Conduct and Civility Education for action. And they use their discretion and don't charge. We in the command staff and the supervisory chain of command have to monitor that and make sure that they're making good judgments and that they're treating everyone fairly, because as soon as you exercise an element of discretion, the easy way to make sure everybody's getting treated fairly is to treat everybody the same across the board no matter what, and not exercise any judgment in it whatsoever. As soon as you exercise any kind of judgment in it, then you gotta have some checks and balances in place and make sure that these things are being done properly. And that's why if there's probable cause to charge criminally, we require a supervisory review if that officer is choosing not to do that. We keep that in the chain of command process, because we want to make sure that we're doing things fairly and that we are doing things above board and across the board. And that's one of the reasons why people in my chain of command, my Deputy Chief Joe Herring sitting in the back of the room, we read these police reports. Even the most mundane, we read these police reports just as checks and balances. And I keep going back to the point that when you're an accredited police department like we are and like Baltimore County is, you have policies and procedures in place that specifically address this. Your accreditation says you have to have these policies in place, and you have to do your checks and balances, and you have to dot your I's and cross your T's. Otherwise, you won't stay accredited.
Thank you for that. I think we have time to respond to one more issue, so I think I'll just kind of close it out with this topic. I'm sure some of, you have a question?
Let me bring up one. This is an observation. Sometimes an individual will have a negative experience with a police officer. The only other people present are police officers. So it's the individual's word against the police officers. And I'm a 60-year-old black man, and I have seen and heard some was true, some was not. Those are the complaints that most concern me, because I wholeheartedly support police officers. They've helped me on numerous occasions, from back when I had a motorcycle, but that's another story, 695. But it does happen, and you're a black male saying, see, this is what I'm talking about, and you have no recourse because it's your word against theirs, and you're going to lose most of the time.
Wait, let me just, you said exactly what I was going to say, so thank you. That's exactly the point that I was going to make and ask them to respond to. And the little statement I wanted to accompany that is because in my 20 years practicing law and having investigated different kinds of issues similar to exactly what you described, especially at my last institution, I came from New York State, and the kinds of things that black students, especially black male students, would bring to me would be somewhere along the lines where it was, he say. And we talked about, the culture of different work spaces and law enforcement, that kind of thing, where it's like, unless I see that video, unless I see that smoking gun, I'm gonna give my officer the benefit of the doubt. Well, one thing that I can say, and I've observed it here and I've observed it in other places, is that, and my husband always says this too, as a black male who's in law enforcement, is always register that complaint. He said, even if you are pretty positive that they're gonna say, we don't have proof, we're not gonna, have that, any kind of finding, he said, everybody needs to get that message loud and clear, because after time goes by, those complaints aggregate. And then you start to see patterns and trends with certain officers and say, okay, we had not enough to find you on these things, but this is some troubling patterns we're seeing. So I'm so glad you brought that up, because I was going to throw that out there to see if you agree with that.
Well,
Absolutely.
But I would also throw in the other part about it, is put the veil of ignorance on it, take away the race. Take away race for a minute and just say you're a citizen, and you're the only citizen there, and there's 5 police officers, because those 5 police officers may very well be black as well. But let's take race out of the equation. If you have a citizen who says X, Y, Z occurred, and 5 police officers who say it did not, the citizen's going to feel the exact same way, regardless of their race, their sex, their religion, ethnic background, you name it. They're going to say, I'm outnumbered by the police. But then you go back to the point that you can still register the complaint, because what you don't know is that may be the 5th complaint that's been received about that particular officer. You don't know the background. Is life always fair? No, it's not always fair. And could that be a situation where the 5 police officers will say that the sky was purple and you said the sky was blue? But you do no one any good by just walking away and saying, well, I'm not going to say anything because they won't take my word for it. And you don't know in an investigation, there might be 5 police officers there. But you know what, when they go to interview the 4, you say, out of the cops that are here, I'm the one who you said talked to you with disrespect. What you don't know is when they interview Jay, who was present, he may say, yeah, he did talk to him with disrespect. Police officers don't always necessarily back up the other officers. They're not going to lie for us. They're not going to take a chance of losing their job and lying in an internal affairs investigation. In a lot of professions, if you misrepresent the truth, you might not lose your job over it. If you're found guilty of lying in law enforcement in 2016, chances are you're getting fired because of the court decisions that are out there. Giglio versus Brady and what have you, that says if you're no longer credible as a witness, we don't need you as a cop anymore.
You can't do your job, you're ineffective.
Right.
So we're at the time mark. Thank you for that last question. Can I just have 10 seconds each?
Yeah, so just in the Code of Student Conduct, it says any student who has a grievance with the university can come to the Office of Student Conduct if they don't know where to go, and to find a place for where that grievance is supposed to be heard. So just know that, I think this is Bernie's point and Jay's point, we all answer to somebody, but you don't always know who we answer to, and if you're not sure who that is, the university has provided that one of the jobs of my office is to help you find out who that is. So please do keep that in mind, because if you have any takeaway from this, it's that there are places where you can at least find out where to go.
Good point. Jay?
And I just want to make sure that everybody knows I'm available to you guys. I mean, if we want to talk in smaller groups at some point, I know Lonnie has organized some things before. I am very much into building perspective between the students and the police. I think it is very important that we do that, that you guys understand where we're coming from, that you know that we understand, and that we are willing to enhance our understanding of the student's perspective as well. I do some of that stuff outside of work with a group I work with at church, where our sister parish is actually located in Sandtown, Winchester, and we go down there. We go down once a month there. They come here, and we talk about the issues of the racial divide and things like that. So, just to kind of give you some perspective on myself, that look, I'm a cop, but these are things that I'm doing outside. It's all about building perspective, and I'm available to you guys whenever you need me.
That's great, thanks. Bernie, any last Good.
I'm very happy we're doing this, we need to do it more. And like I said, I think the more we interact with one another, the more we understand one another, and the more we see each other as human beings.
Excellent benediction. And thank you for your attention. This is such a great topic, and I appreciate you endured through the fire alarms.